Okay, I think we'll get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Joanne Gabriel, and on behalf of Darien Library, I want to welcome you to our special gardening program tonight, a conversation with author Jennifer Jewell on her new book, What We Sow, on the personal, ecological, and cultural significance of seeds. Jennifer will be in conversation with Dina Brewster, owner of Ridgefield's The Hickories Farm, a historic organic working farm and CSA that provides safe and nutritious products with respect for soil, animals, and people. She's also the founder of the Ecotype Project, a farmer-led seed collective. Before we begin, I would like to mention that programs at Darien Library are made possible by the annual Friends of the Library campaign. We thank you for your support to make programs like this possible and our collections available to the community. A little bit about our presenters. Jennifer Jewell is a gardener, garden writer, and gardening educator and advocate. Since 2016, she has written and hosted the national award-winning weekly public radio program and podcast, Cultivating Place, which I highly recommend you check out at cultivatingplace.com. Jennifer is particularly interested in the intersections between gardens, the native plant environments around them, and human culture. Jennifer is the author of the book Under Western Skies, Visionary Gardens from the Rockies to the Pacific Coast, which was released in May of 2021, and The Earth in Her Hands, 75 Extraordinary Women Working in the World of Plants, released March of 2020. What We Sow is her third book. Dina Brewster has been a full-time farmer since 2005. She founded the Hickories as a 1-acre vegetable garden and has overseen the development of new products and new acreage as the farm has grown to a 45-acre certified organic fruit, vegetable, cut flower, livestock, and restoration seed company. Committed to connecting people with working land, Dina chose to return to her family's farm in Ridgefield and start the Community-Supported Agriculture (CSA) program, one that still exists as a backbone of the farmer's business plan. She served as the executive director of the Northeast Organic Farming Association of Connecticut, also known as CT-NOFA, from 2019 to 2022. Her most recent work, founding the Ecotype Project and becoming a seed farmer for the native plants from this region, has helped to catalyze the formation of the Northeast Seed Network of the Native Plant Trust, a collaborative effort for the development of a native seed supply chain in the Northeast. Please welcome Jennifer and Dina.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and so excited to be in conversation with Dina. The last time I was speaking for the Darien Library, I was supposed to be there in person in March or April of 2020. And well, you all know March, April 2020. So I think we eventually did an online event, and I am just really honored to be back tonight and talking to you about this book, but especially in conversation with Dina, and to be doing anything in support of the Darien Library and libraries everywhere. I'm going to give a really quick little preamble and tell you just a tiny bit about myself and about the book before I go into conversation with Dina. As was already introduced, I am the host and creator of Cultivating Place, which started in 2016. Its mission really is to elevate the way we think and talk about gardening, gardeners, and gardens in our world, and to encourage, empower, engage gardeners to really step into their full power and potential as really important intersectional agents and spaces for positive change in our world, if we see them that way, from our economies to our environment, to our human communities, to our soil and water and biodiversity and climates. Gardeners really sit at the intersection of all the possible agency we can have to affect change in these crises that are certainly confluencing all around us. I like to think about the word garden, the idea of a gardener and a garden space, in as broad and expansive of terms as you possibly can, and to remind us that it's never just one thing, and it's never just one way or one type. that constitutes all of the capacity of the word garden, and that humans across time and space on this planet have engaged in this act of relating to, engaging with, surviving as a result of, and improving their own lives through their relationships with plants and place. Every culture, every continent, every ecosystem that has included humans has included gardeners across time and space. And this sort of common ground, I think, is really fertile for how we meet and transcend all of those things that could divide us, whether it is politics or religion or what to have for dinner. Like, we can come together in the garden and speak the same language and find ways to move forward. I honestly believe that. And in the course of my program and the writing of my books, which are all in service to the mission of the podcast and its messages, I think bear out this fact that when we speak together as gardeners from all different spaces and intentions and perspectives, we can grow better together. And so in 2020, when I was on the road for that first book tour and was sent home early because of the lockdown in California, while I was actually in New York City about to interview Jamaica Kincaid in person at the New York Botanical Garden, and all of a sudden California shut down, there was this experience of recognizing that I needed to get home. My whole career was in a sort of, spin, as was most of ours, and were most of ours. And but one of the first things on my mind was that I needed to order seeds for my spring garden. John, my partner, and I thought we were going to be on the road for 9 weeks, and instead we were headed home, and we were going to be home and in the garden for a long time in an unexpected way. And so we needed to order seeds. And in that moment, we got these messages that many of us as gardeners got, saying out of order, back ordered, unavailable, out of stock, whatever it might be. And it was this existential, like, panic almost in my reptilian brain that was sort of irrational, but at the same time very powerful. And I think many gardeners felt it, of what don't I know about seed? And that took me on this several-year journey in exploring all the ways that seed is meaningful in our lives, seed is available or not available in our lives, seed is visible and transparent and not in our lives, and what that means to us, not just as gardeners, but as people. Because I think we will recognize, just from the diversity of seed you see here in my crazy seed drawer, when you think about it for any length of time, seed is the basis of our gardens. It is the basis of our food, our flowers, our vegetables. It is the basis. Now, let me see if I can get this fancy little. Oh, can you guys hear that? Can you hear that, Dina? Okay, good.
I can see it.
Okay, good. This is a native bumblebee on a non-native Rosa rugosa rose, but seed that is being prepared for in that pollination moment right there is the basis of so much habitat. It is, I guess I have it twice because I loved it so much. Little bee sonicating on that beautiful rose. It's the basis of all of our food, our flowers, but also our ecosystems. And one of the things that was important to me in this exploration was that I try and understand and reconnect the fact that we often talk about the diminishing biodiversity of the foods available to us and our crop seed plants. And we talk about our ecosystem restoration and preservation in a different arena. And the fact is, they're the same. They may not be exactly the same, but they all go back to the same idea, because all of our food crops were once native plants, and they have wild native progenitors. And all of our ecosystems bear edible foods that may or may not be the ancestors or descendants of edible crops for other peoples. And this reconnection, I think, shows us some important things. And I'm sure Dina and I are going to get into that because she is really the embodiment of all that I'm talking about in the way she runs her farm, in the way she sees the importance of reintegrating our meat food with our soil, with our water, with our seed. Um, One of the great joys of this project was meeting, exploring, re-interviewing, reviewing the work of the seed keepers I had started to work with and interview for the Earth in Her Hands. And these are those 5 women. So we have Renee Shepard of Shepard Garden Seeds. We have Ira Wallace of the Southern Exposure Seed Exchange, who is really like the matriarch of the idea of seed preservation of cultural significance and foods and seeds of the African diaspora, and really bearing witness to the work of someone like Rowan White in the next generation down, who is a incredible spokeswoman for the rehydration, a word she uses, of indigenous knowledge and indigenous seed keeping, and improving and supporting that capacity, because it's those leadership voices that are really, I think, giving us guiding lights for how we as gardeners can move in this world to take the agency we have and grow the world we want. This, of course, is Vandana Shiva. I don't know what this little thing is. There we go. An incredible seed keeper out of India, very dedicated to seed and food sovereignty in the places around the world where it still exists, including India. And this is Carol Ruiz, who is the executive director of the Organic Seed Alliance. In the course of this book, I, of course, meet many, many more seed keepers around the world, and all of their stories are illuminating, and seen together, they are so energizing and hopeful, because there are so many big urgencies and daunting crises, whether it is the consolidation of seed at the corporate level, the fact that 60% of the seed industry is controlled by 4 pharmaceutical petrochemical companies that coat them with neonicotinoids and plant out hundreds of millions of acres in these seed across our monoculture, large ag spaces in the country. And it's not just the Midwest, it's everywhere. And what that means to us and what we can do about it, because many of the land-based seed keepers, whether they are young and new in Philadelphia or they are older and at this work for decades, such as Vandana Shiva and Ira Wallace, the cultural seed keepers of today really hold up this idea that seed are, as our plants, are our ancestors or our relatives, and they are these blessings and lessons encoded from the past being handed to us in order to steward them forward for the future. That is our responsibility, that is our privilege, that is our great joy and opportunity. And to contrast that worldview with one that sees them as just another commodity to coat with insecticide and do what they will with is really at the heart of the tension that I try and explore in this book, because we know we can do this really, really well. And when you see this, if you are a gardener and, in the work that I do, that Dina does, I think we can sometimes feel like we say the same thing over and over and over and over again. But the fact is, we cannot say this enough. We cannot keep trying, keep talking, keep modeling, keep looking to the best models enough. Because if this is our default, we are lost as a species. If tending to 40 million acres of overmown, overblown, overgrown, overfed, non-native monoculture turf grass is our default, we are literally lost as a species. Our children are lost, our water is lost, our plants are lost, our future is lost. But when we energize and support the gardeners among us, we have a different future possible. And it is not a future that is based on this. It is a future that is based on the incredible diversity that nature has provided us for our food, for our beauty, for our utility, for our medicine, for our ritual, and certainly, I hope, for our children and the future. That right there is the currency that will help us find our way. And I really thank you for listening. Some people like a little list, so I'm giving you my list right here before I just dive into this conversation with Dina that I'm so excited about to kind of unpack some of what I said and see what it means on the ground in your exact place with a farmer who has all of this ethos at their heart.
Thank you, Jennifer. Wow, that was wonderful, wonderful framing for what I'm also been looking forward to for weeks. So I really appreciate you being here, and thank you also to the Darien Library. I wanted to just make sure, because I know I speak for a lot of folks who have read this book and who are here tonight, that the first thing that comes out of my mouth is thank you. Thank you for writing this book, and how meaningful it was for me as a farmer to read it. I know for so many people, it is one of those things that I had to laugh because I, was alerted to the book by my friend Deepika. And then somehow over the course of the next 2 months, I can't tell you how many people wrote to me to say, have you read this book? I'm sending you a copy of this book. So now I have a sort of stack on my desk of everybody. You've just got to read this. So I'm the proud owner of about 12 copies of your book.
Oh my Lord. Well, I hope you pass them on 1,000 times.
I will. But I was thinking about the conversation and I kept reflecting. I was a Peace Corps volunteer a long time ago, and I remember that in learning a new language, and sort of immersing myself in a new language, how amazed I was every time that when you learn a new word, you learn a new concept or a new emotion. And so in reading this book, I think part of where my thank you, my gratitude comes from is that in putting words to what is so magical about seeds, it really does also sort of, I think, deepen just giving it language deepens the reverence that we all can have for this work. So I'm very, very grateful. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I want to just add here that it was the privilege of my life to research, and I think the responsibility of my life, Dina, to do this work myself. And that was its main impetus, is that I didn't know these stories. Like, as a gardener, as a garden communicator who thinks on these levels, like, these were things I didn't understand, and I had to refresh some of my biology, but I certainly had to go deeper into exactly what is happening and why I, as a gardener, have a responsibility, but again, a privilege to actually know and pay more attention. And so the fact that other people could go on this journey with me is very, very gratifying. But it meant all of that to me to do the research and to write it down as well. So thank you.
I wanted to just first start with the sort of title of the book. I was really struck in reading it that you are weaving together that, it's the subtitle of the book rather is personal, ecological, and cultural. And so I wondered if you could speak to us first about sort of your decision not to write 3 books, but you wrote 1 instead of 3.
Well, one of the things that was very apparent to me as I wrote the book was that being who I am, a gardener and a garden, advocate, I'm not a big gardener. I'm not a fancy gardener. I'm not a scientist. I am not a seed keeper. And there are many out there who are, and I know in my heart that many of them are going to be filling out the bookshelves of what it means to be, an indigenous seed keeper, an African a diaspora or an Asian diaspora seed keeper. So it was really important to me that I was giving myself the primer that I needed to understand and to sort of almost set the table for what I think is coming from the building capacity in these humans. And I wanted to make sure I was telling my story, not someone else's story. And that as gardeners, we all engage with seed indirectly, if not directly. And so how does it matter? Where do we not see it? Those were really important things to me. And in doing the research, of course, read many of the books that are already out there about seed. And many of them seemed a little bloodless. I'm going to say that. Like they seemed like they were telling me about the biology, or they were telling me about the grand evolutionary co-adaptation of, how ecosystems, or how they had become the dominant plants on the planet. And that was great. And we need that information. But they didn't seem to have like skin in the game as to why this mattered to us and why we should be caring more about it, not just as an intellectual exercise, but as a really like existential anchor. And that was important to me. I think interweaving the personal part also, it served sort of two purposes for me. It allowed me to keep regrounding into why I cared and why this was really important to my place and my faith in the act of relating to and with and learning from plants and their ecosystems. And it also allowed me like a little bit of respite. Some of these research lines were really hard, like digging into the last 75 years of how petrochemical pharmaceutical companies came to be the major actors in our commodity seed world is sickening and devastating. And you feel complicit in it sometimes because, you buy a bag of Doritos, you buy a bottle of non-organic corn oil for something, like whatever it might be. Like we can't keep our eyes on every ball or seed, as it were, all the time. And so, trying to like step back into my place gave me a little rest, and trying to find my own cultural pathway into this conversation, even though I am not a seed keeper per se. Those three things felt really important to me.
Just to drill into something you said a minute ago, you talked about, and you showed a picture of Rowan White in the opening slides, and we have spoken about our mutual admiration for her. But she once said, and you said part of what was interesting or what was compelling for you in writing the book was trying to get a sense of what's coming.
Mhm.
And Rowan White, I once heard her say, 150 years ago, you cite this in the book at one point, 150 years ago, seed companies didn't exist. She said, and if we do our work right, in 150 years, they won't be needed. They won't exist.
Yeah.
In your sense, having done this work, what is your prognosis? If you look into the crystal ball, what do you think at the end is coming? If that was something that compelled you to write it, what would you say is building? Do you agree with Rowan? Is that where we're headed?
Do I agree? I certainly don't disagree with Rowan White on anything because my regard for her leadership and voice in this space is so high. Would I want there to be no independent bookstores because we have libraries? I don't think so. What I hope is that we have a much more vigorous local independent seed pathway, that there are independent sowers, sharers, sellers, that there is a much more robust network on the ground rather than this really egregiously top heavy and still almost invisible big brother, if you will, over the seed the seed world. And as one of the seed keepers in the book, Jeff Quattrone, who has been very active in Slow Food and their seed work, as well as helping to set up a whole seed library network in New Jersey and reinvigorating several heirloom tomato seed varieties there in New Jersey, said, the larger the mainstream, the more room there is for an undercurrent. And so, you know, many seed scientists talk about the seed as being this liminal space, somewhere between life and death. It is dormant, it is inert, but it is still alive. And I think that is the line we as a cultural entity that is the industrialized world, I think that is where we are sitting right now, is on that line between which way are we going to go. And the hope and the optimism that I feel at having traced so many of the human networks of seed keepers and growers and farmers and activists in our world at this exact work, stewarding, shepherding, overseeing, fiercely protecting the integrity and access to seed and its great diversity, gives me a lot of hope that we are moving into a time period where we reassess what is valuable, and the importance of things like community and plant ecosystems and seed is going to once again rise to the level of truly valuable. And things like whether or not we can get Doritos all day, every day in every market of a million flavors, that will be less valuable.
The other sort of aspect of that, which I found really helpful in reading the book, was the synergy, maybe the wrong word, tension, I'm not sure, that existed for you as you took us in between wild spaces and then back to the garden and out into the native plant community and back into the garden. And that's something that, for me, you know, as one of those small seed companies that's, you know, struggling to live at the bottom of the ocean, I think that journey for me has been really powerful. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that, whether, you know, for you it's a tension or whether it's a mutual support that exists between people or folks who are working on native seed and folks who are working in the cultivated seed space.
Well, I definitely think synergy is tension, right? Like there is this friction that creates both warmth and maybe sometimes too much heat, hard to say. I think that we do tend as people, because it's easier to take off bite-sized chunks and it's easier to like cope or grapple with one piece of a very big puzzle at a time. But in breaking the importance of seed down into its component parts without trying to see all of the ways that the forest comes together, to just like really overplay that metaphor. But actually I had like 4 metaphors in there with the puzzle and the forest. And anyway, you see where I'm going. I think that we need to do both, right? We need to not only support the cultivated seed world, because it is one whole leg of a stool, even more metaphor, but also see how that relates to the importance of supporting and building the capacity of the native seed ecosystem restoration supply chain as well, because we're going to need them both and they are directly related. You know, all of the research, which I found fascinating, into the biodiversity loss and how we see ourselves as humans, not just being scavengers and parasites on the planet, but being an active and possibly positive participant in the planet, indicate that in those places where we have humans who are actively participating in cultivating some of the space around them, supporting the biodiversity of the native plants right around that, and engaging in raising a little bit of livestock, hunting, fishing, and supporting, again, these wild spaces, not only for the biodiversity and buffer they provide, but for making sure they remain healthy for things like fishing and hunting. It's these little, and I think in the last couple of years, there's been that phrase of a diversified family farm, and the idea of that, all of those intersections of cultivating a little bit of the plant life for actual produce or flowers or herbs for medicine, as well as the hedgerow, as well as the stream and the forest, mean that you actually have the greatest biodiversity in that intersection, where a human is helping to care for the wild, tend a little bit of the cultivated. And so there's this balance. And that research was really illuminating to me, because it did remind me that we aren't always negative as an impact on the world. We do have a role in helping to preserve biodiversity and actually nurture it in better ways than nature might take on for itself if left completely to itself. I mean, it's a little bit like, do you compost in a bin and you turn and turn and turn because you get really fast compost, or do you let it compost over time? I mean, yeah, I'm way digressing, but we can let succession take its place, but it will go up and down in biodiversity. The forest will take over, it will shade everything out, then a fire will come through, and then we'll start the whole succession again. Humans tending to the land well and thoughtfully and knowledgeably, they increase biodiversity. They don't decrease it.
Just jumping off of that too, that tension that you described between the wild and the cultivated, I really feel particularly in the industry, because the same could be said about farmers and conservation folks, right?
Yes.
That they don't work together particularly well. And the answer is about trying to create those alliances, trying to understand that we are in fact allies and work better together when farmers are doing conservation work and conservation people are thinking about agriculture. The sticking point for me, though, and maybe just my experience because I'm doing ecotypic seed from this region here at our farm, is always having to guard, as humans, when you go into to start working with native plants, guarding against making those selections that we make in our farmer brain and our gardener brain that says, I'm going to save the seed of the biggest, juiciest, most beautiful, tallest, bushiest flower. Nature is actually not making those selections and is casting a much wider net. And so I think that's been really challenging for me as well, in doing the work that, and you don't want to stick your finger in a pie.
And okay, so one of the great things that I really experienced over and over again in doing the research on this book is trying so hard never to fall into the binary that this is good and this is bad and this is black and this is white and yes, no, right, wrong, because we know that what you just said is true if we think about it, right? Like, we don't want to over-select, over-hybridize, over-propagate by cuttings so that we diminish diversity. But we also know that as humans, having worked with the plant life around us, whether we are in Central America or, deepest, darkest Asia, or here in Northern California, or where you are in New Jersey. Are you in New Jersey?
Connecticut. Same.
Connecticut. That's
really
I knew that. I knew that. In selecting, we have increased diversity. In over-selecting, we reduce diversity. And so there's always going to be this balance. And it's one of our great joys. Like, I don't care how old you are. You might be 2 years old. You might be 62 years old. We love novelty. We love the biggest, the brightest, the flashiest, the juiciest, and I don't think that's going to change for us. But this is true of why seed and flowers have developed the way they have, because they are playing on that impulse, not just in us as mammals, but in all the birds and the mammals that help them do their work as plants. So I think we have to be careful and just remember to keep paying attention and to keep like working on the spectrum. And when we realize we've gone a little too far one way, come back, come back a little bit. And if we need to come back more, we can. And then if our natural tendency to go towards novelty again moves us, like, it's a constant adaptation and evolution. And when you think about the fact that 80% of our planet's plant life are these seed-bearing angiosperms, the flowering seed-bearing plants constitute 80% of plant life. And there are something like 300,000 species of these plants, only 260,000 of which have been described by science, so that other 40,000 is a guesstimate. They've been co-evolving and adapting to figure out ways to succeed, to collaborate, to compete, to survive for 365 million years. Like, we have messed a lot up, but they're still there and they are still doing their thing in large part. And we have the chance right now to adjust where we have gotten this balance so very wrong and learn from them how much they still have to teach us.
Mm-hmm. I've been really trying to watch more this fall, the ways in which the wild plants that the native seed crops that we're growing here on the farm, the big concern was they were going to sort of run out into the vegetable rows, right? And that all of the weed, the New York ironweed and milkweed, that suddenly we'd be weeding all of this stuff out of our vegetable rows. But in fact, the opposite has happened, which is they are escaping, but they are escaping back outside the fence lines. So now you walk into the woods or walk off the farm and all of these plants have found their way out into the world. And I really am trying to watch that closely, because I think there is so much to learn about the ways in which seed has intention.
Yes. And agency, right? Like, yeah. There are ways in which, even though they are not necessarily mobile, but that seed adaptation in these plant lives, like, that was the golden ticket. That is when the seed-bearing plants developed that free pollinating with the help of animals. That moment is when those plants exploded and dominated the planet. So there is a lot to learn, and they have more agency than we think they have. And that's cool, right? That helps us remember that we have messed a lot of things up, but that it can also repair itself if we step out of the way, and we aren't as big as we think we are. And I think that is a helpful perspective to remember that we are also very little, and our time frames are very little compared to, a 250-year-old valley oak tree out here that survives without any water for 9 months and, produces 10,000 acorns.
They, just jumping off of that too, I've been struck that the ways in which these plants find their way is also what you're talking about, is such an antidote to the way people are so depressed about the invasives, right?
Yeah.
That we somehow think, well, now we have this other battle to fight with nature around invasives. And when I'm looking at these escaped wild plants, many of my seed is finding its way to places where it can outcompete the invasive pressure on the farm. So they wait until the soils thin out, over the rock ledge, and then they take hold. And the challenge of dealing with invasives must have been very real for you. I know in the Northeast, it's something that you can't ever avoid.
Right. And I think it is a little bit harder in the West, only because we do have so much more, certainly not pristine space, but so much more national park space, so much more wild space that is still relatively undegraded by human development. And so we still have stuff to lose here that we don't want to lose. But again, there's that binary of, we tend to get so passionate that we become these sort of native plant purists, and that doesn't speak to the long legacy of humans and plants. And it also, I think, isn't in our best interest. I don't love the invasive plants that have taken over the canyon that I write about, but in some ways, I'm also watching those invasive plants feed some of the birds or the insects. And, so they come from their own stories and their own places where they were once native plants. And so, again, it's not all good, all bad. And yet I do find myself as a gardener hoping to never be that person that introduces an invasive plant. It is mortifying to me that the gardening industry is the culprit that has introduced so many of the invasive plants that have diminished biodiversity everywhere. But we can't necessarily go back. We can just try and stem the tide, see where they are working, see where we can collaborate or outcompete them, as you say, and just keep going forward like that. And many of them are beautiful in their way when they are not destroying ecosystems, and they teach us things. They teach us lessons that we can always learn from. Yeah.
Right. That's really such a powerful thing, but it involves being open and sort of watching. I think one of the things that I think about a lot too, as I begin to cultivate seed crops, are the ways in which, when you take native plants and begin to put them into production, that you do, as a farmer, you fall into my own, what is that expression? To a hammer, everything's a nail. Or something that, like, I think, oh, okay, you need me to grow these? I'll put them in straight rows. I'll weed them twice a year, make sure they're well fed. And it's fascinating to see the ways in which those plants are saying, no, thank you, right? I don't want to grow in a straight row. I'm going to jump over here, or I'm going to come up with this like weird fasciation, ugly structure because I'm too overfed with this yummy soil.
Right.
But I do think that watching is really something that, in reading the book anyway, I was sort of reminded of how important it is to just go slow with seed.
Go slow. Yeah. And it makes you, right? I mean, in some cases, I don't know, we planted our carrot seed last week, or John, I should say, planted our carrot seed. And carrot takes a long time to germinate. And, we also last year planted a lot of native lily seed. They take months to germinate, and they take years before they are large enough to actually even begin to think about producing leaves and a flower. So it is a good reminder. And you and I sort of touched on this earlier, but that idea of what we don't know, and what we don't know until we see we're missing something, I think is such an opportunity. But we think of plants as competing, but we know they also collaborate. We know they rely on each other for changing the soil, or providing shade or wind shelter. And so when we take them out of their homes, just like when we take us out of our homes and we ask them to line up in school and sit down and sit still, like, who does well that way? We know we don't. So why would they? And so, like, having people like you on the ground working this embodied knowledge that you are learning all the time, and then finding better ways to model for other farmers how you can raise your animals and your kids and your seeds in these more organic, open, free-flowing ways. I mean, it sounds sort of hippie, but we also know that, like, we can do better.
Right. I mean, we have to invent a new agriculture for it,
and or unlearn the agriculture we have been, indoctrinated with, and go back to finding the dormant knowledge in the indigenous peoples around the globe, and how they're doing it, and how that might help us unlearn and relearn better ways. Because the agro-industrial complex, for all of its profits and all of its promises of feeding a growing planet, it hasn't worked, and so why not try some other ways that rebuild soil, replenish and save water, don't use chemical inputs? I mean, why not try?
Mhm, mhm. Especially in a community in a country like ours with as many resources as we have. I was talking to Vandana Shiva at one point. I studied at her farm, and we were talking about the seed and the organic movement in the Northeast. And I kept saying, what the vision you lay out is so perfect and so beautiful, but like the work is going to be really hard. It's really difficult. And she said, I don't know how that would ever happen in the Northeast. And she said, well, in the Himalaya, we did it across 7 countries and 15 different languages in communities with absolutely nothing, like, and we managed to have an organic district.
Right.
You're telling me it's going to be hard,
Right. And so that speaks right there to our greatest challenge being our mindsets, right? That's it. That's it. Like, we have to stop seeing what we can't do and reimagine what we can do, and try it.
Yeah. In the fewer minutes that we have left, I'm going to jump shift a little bit to, you mentioned your carrots and your lilies. What are some of your other favorites? Like, what's happening in your garden? What seeds are you stratifying this winter? Talk to us a little bit about your plants.
Well, I'm like a squirrel or a magpie. I'm like, oh, that has seed or that has seed. And I just got some Matilaha poppy, and I just got some beautiful salvia seed. So we will definitely sow some of those. We'll start them in pots just to get them to germinate, and then see where we might put them out in the garden. At John's, my partner's land, we have a beautiful fenced little vegetable garden, and he does his nursery pots there. And we do have a fenced orchard because we have a lot of deer and bear. And but then we have big berms that have probably about 80% native plants, our native salvias and our native buckwheats, eriogonums, which, if you're not familiar with those plants in the West, are just phenomenal. And you could probably grow them in the East as annuals, but they are just beautiful and big, generous genera here in the West of the U.S. Those are some of my favorites right now, and I'm really hopeful. We planted the lily seeds on my birthday, which is in early November last year. So I'm really hopeful that by next year at my birthday, we actually start to see a little bit of bulbing in the plants. I collect way more than I am actually going to work with, which I know Rowan White would say, don't do that. And I try not to. I'm a greedy human. Those are the fun ones. And I might try growing a couple of seed roses. So I have a lot of rose hips, and I would love to see what comes out of some of my hybridized rose hips in the way of seedling variation.
Yeah. That's neat. There's a bunch of folks around us, the folks up at the Hudson Valley Seed Library, Ken Green and his crowd. They started a project years ago. I don't know that I've followed it, but doing seed crops of dahlias.
Yes.
So they're normally clonal, and then you can sort of, like, it's like getting a seed from your tulip or something that you would never,
Right.
You see these incredible combinations.
Right.
And I think it really does, it is inspiring, part of what's interesting about the work that I'm doing, and then obviously what you are bringing people to, is that this isn't actually just for the big, like, seed breeding and plant breeding and working with seed is not just for the big land grant universities to do this kind of work. That you could see what grows from your own dahlia seed, or you could try to do those lilies from seed rather than clonal, and that's wonderful.
Right. And to combine that with the incredible, like, generative work of your ecotype project, like, that's everything right there. That's the whole world improved, from flowers to food to our wildlife. And, like, seed sits at the nexus of all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do have about 10 minutes or so left. So I see chat questions, or at least one has started to come in, but I do want to make sure we have time to open that up. We maybe have gone a little over in our chatter, so we should open it up for questions.
This has been great. It's been fantastic. We do have some questions. Dina, one is that, can you explain ecotypic seed and how it works, and what types of ecotypic seeds are you growing on your farm?
Sure thing. the word ecotype, I feel a little bit sometimes like, those guys back in the Rodale Institute in the day chose the word organic and then spent 40 years trying to explain to everybody what it meant. So a lot of people know about native plants. And a fellow named James Omernick, about maybe 15 years ago, created an eco-regional map of the United States. So if many of us know the old Zone 3, Zone 4, Zone 5 kind of thing, climate change has sort of exploded that. And instead, we're looking at this new map, the eco-regional map, that describes a sort of overlay of soil, water, plant life, etc. The ecotypic plants of your region are the ones that have co-evolved to live there. So that's what we are doing at the Ecotype Project, and at our small seed company, Eco 59, is really looking not just at planting milkweed, but planting the ecotype, or the specific milkweed that has co-evolved in this ecoregion, which is Ecoregion 59. For those of us in Darien who are tuning in, welcome to Ecoregion 59. You probably didn't even know you lived there.
And where can you get that seed?
I'll put the URL. Thank you very much. Exit through the gift shop. I'll put the URL.
And definitely look for Dina on the Cultivating Place podcast early in 2024 to talk about all this and more.
Oh, terrific.
For
Excellent.
sure. Yep. But in working with these plants, it is really, I think, that the monarch, what was the garden, those monarch gardens, the lawns with the one big beautiful garden, I first saw that company in a lecture from Doug Ptolemy, and and I think he has spoken at the Darien Library as well. I'm sure I've seen
Benjamin
his
Vogt, yeah.
And one of the things, and I admire so much everything he's done, and it was really galvanizing for me to hear him speak. However, every slide or every image that he shows of a farmer is, a 10-bottom moldboard plow and a cloud of dust, boom, sprayers of insecticide. And so I think it's really important. And I love, particularly in your book, and in particularly the other books that you have written, the ways in which you can elevate an agriculture that isn't about farmers being the perpetrators of climate crisis.
Well, yeah, and it's reclaiming that word from its agro-industrialization back to what its original version was. And the same thing with garden. Like, there's a lot of, like, I just use this word, like colonizer baggage and consumer baggage that goes with those two words now. And I say no. Like, we can reclaim those words to their full potential. So we can talk more about that when I get you on the podcast, because it's true. The farmers are not inherently evil, and neither are gardeners always, middle-aged white women with a glass of wine and a lot of throw pillows. That's not what it means. And so I want to get to that other question about the importance of seed libraries, especially since we are speaking for a library tonight. And I think the role of seed libraries is so beautiful. It's so poetic, and it is so pragmatic. And it puts seed from an exact place in its public library, in its common access location. And it makes it available, whether, like, it puts it right there at eye level view for the people coming in for book story reading, or looking for a novel for their elderly father who can't get to the library anymore. And it allows a place that is public access and open pollinated humans, if you will, to get together and save their seed, catalog it, and then make it available for others. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what a seed library is, it is essentially a seed swap set up in a library for that exact community. Most of them have annuals, but seed of vegetables and flowers and herbs, but many more are starting to take on adding native seed and adding perennial or trees and shrubs to their library holdings. The basic premise is the same. You come in and you donate seed that you might have collected from your garden. You try and make sure that it's not a hybrid, and that it is not patented, so that it's all legal, and that it will come true from seed. And it is cataloged by the people who are the volunteers create the library. And then you come in and you say, oh, I would like to try this dahlia. And you take some of that seed home with you. And if you are successful, then hopefully you feel called to actually take seed back to the seed library the next year. They are just a beautiful, iteration and manifestation of returning seed to the commons and seed knowledge to being part of our cultural literacy.
And so often shepherded by gardeners, right? I mean, I think
Yeah.
that is such an important thing, is to say, you know, that this work, particularly in the East, there are not huge tracts of BLM land left out here anymore. There's nothing on the East Coast. It's all of our land. Our native seed library is privately held
Right.
because none of our land is public anymore east of the Mississippi. And so there are these, and yet, you know, time and time again in doing the work around community seed keeping that we do, you find people saying, oh, well, you know, but I'm not a real farmer. I'm a and you think,
Right.
what is that?
No, don't do that. Don't do
Don't
that.
do
You are
that.
never just a gardener. You are never
No.
just or not a farmer. Like, just relate to the plants, share them if you can.
Right.
Other people will help you. And if you're a gardener and you have an extra couple of hours, like, get involved. That's the way we indoctrinate and seed the next, inoculate. That's a better word. We inoculate and seed the next generation. And it was started by the idea. The first one was actually in Gardiner, New York. I love that name. By Kay Green, who became then, with his partner Doug Muller, the founder of the Hudson Valley Seed Company. And he does all kinds of philanthropic work with seed as well. So yeah, seed
They're a
libraries
great
are
resource.
important and beautiful, and they are now all over the country.
It's wonderful.
Okay, I think we'll finish up on one last question, which is, how can I tend to my land or my backyard in a beneficial way, wild versus cultivated, or how can I make a difference in my hometown?
I'm happy to jump in here. Just get started. Just start, like, go outside, learn a couple of your plants, maybe cultivate a couple of the plants you love the most. It might be roses, it might be your native solidago or asters, or all of the above. It might be the foods you love to eat, like green beans or corn or carrots, whatever, cilantro. Get started little bit by little bit. Rule number one, put away the chemicals. Don't use them. Don't use them for anything, not ever, not if you can help it. They should be regulated like firearms, and even those aren't regulated well enough, perhaps, but I digress. They're toxic, they kill things. That's not what we're in the business to do as gardeners. So figure out the methodologies and the cultivation practices that mean you don't need those chemicals. So, and then, you know, just keep learning, keep asking questions. Try, you know, if you have a lawn, take out a tiny bit of it and put in some flowers. If you can make them native flowers, all the better. If you're going to take on a big project and re-landscape your lawn or your back garden, try and incorporate about 75% natives, flowers, shrubs, and trees, so that you have a place for everybody. The birds, the insects, the little mammals that are beneficial, and stay wide open and just see what brings you joy, and then keep cultivating that. That's my advice. Dina, jump in here.
That is perfect. And we actually, I would rather end on that. You said it perfectly. It's lovely.
Oh, that's great. That's just wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Dina, for this wonderful conversation, your amazing insight on everything on seeds and planting and farming and ecotype and everything. I hope everyone else, I hope you enjoyed this program. Happy gardening, or thinking about gardening in the spring, and good night.